Hi friends, host Eric here, and I'm going to talk today about why MBTI is the most objective form of psychology.
Talking with famous people.
People say MBTI is a pseudoscience. They say personality typing is office astrology, as I heard in a comment this morning. 90s office astrology was referred to. Okay, so let me explain something. Before you go off commenting about whether or not MBTI is pseudoscience or whatever, try to have some frame of reference in which you're operating. So first of all, try to understand what exactly is psychology supposed to do, or what is psychology, or what aspects of psychology do you think are not bullshit, and why. So if you haven't addressed any of those questions, then you're just spewing out your ass for no reason. But the answer to those questions is also the answers to why cognitive functions represent the only real objective form of psychology that's not prescriptive. Now, obviously, some psychology is prescriptive. If somebody comes to you and says, "Dear psychologist or psychiatrist, I am having problems mentally, emotionally, not physically," then you're engaging the psychology of a single human being from a prescriptive or pathological perspective. That's another story, right? That's something that you don't necessarily have to understand in order to help. A lot of psych drugs that work on people who have serious psychological problems, not bullshit like ADHD, but like schizophrenia or something. People like that have psych drugs that work, but they're not exactly sure why they work. So in those kind of instances, note, it doesn't really matter what the explanation is, it matters the efficacy. However, if you're saying to me something like, "I can't believe this 90s office astrology is still around," then you are not critiquing something's efficacy, you are critiquing it on legitimacy grounds, that is, say, logic grounds. And the problem with that is you have no such grounds upon which to critique it, because it's the only attempted logic that psychology has as a frame of reference. Everything else doesn't even attempt to understand things correctly. So, to clarify exactly what I mean here, individual human beings differ from each other and share similarities with each other in terms of their physicalities, such as Rachel and I are the same in that we both have kind of similar toned skin. We're different in that she's a girl and I'm a boy. We're the same in that we're both over 5 feet. We're different in that I'm a lot over 5 feet, she's a little over 5 feet. So, okay, those are things we can all agree on, right? Those are definitive kinds of, of calculus, because it's talking about physical attributes that comprise objective data, which is to say that we can all access the data independently, equally, and we can all draw our own conclusions about it. When you have a circumstance where you've got clearly objective data like that, it makes it pretty easy to reach consensus about it. However, human beings are only somewhat objective data. That is to say, my feelings are something I can report upon. Thereafter, my words about my feelings become objective data. We can all access my words. However, what those words are conveying, the emotion inside of me, the sensation of feeling and emotion, is not going to be successfully transferred over. We can only symbolize it. We can't actually share it literally. So the thing is, to begin in psychology and to be a serious thinker about it is to begin with a lot of observational stuff. What was I saying? You weren't listening. I don't blame you. So if you want, right, no, it's fine, Rachel, because I'm just blah 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 blah, right? So the thing is, what are things we can observe about human beings? We can observe that we pay attention to multiple fields. Right then, Rachel wasn't paying attention to the external metaphysical fields, which is where I'm saying these words. She was paying attention somewhere else. She may have been remembering something. She may have been just looking around, waiting to see what she sees and knowing things about it.
I had heard the motorcycle come up, and I was like wondering what was going on. cop car motor, I guess. And I was like, oh, I think it's another
In half a
motorcycle.
mile, take exit
But it was
52
not. It
toward
was the cop
Baseline
car.
Road.
Okay, so in other words, you were knowing about the real-time sensory environment rather than, whoa, Jesus. I think the world conspired against me on this drive today. You gotta be careful,
Take
dude.
exit 52.
Got to be careful. You're gonna hit somebody, like me. So, like there, right? I
In a
have
quarter
to.
mile, turn left onto East Baseline Road.
I had to shift gears mentally in terms of my attention from what I was talking about to what was going on in the road. I couldn't do both concurrently because the amount of attention that each was requiring was greater than the total amount of attention I have to pay.
Turn left onto East Baseline Road.
I pause and make room for her to talk because I understand that you cannot pay attention to two voices concurrently saying different things and understand both of them.
Left.
And you're gonna go left?
Yeah.
Well, why are there two right turn lanes and and one left turn lane?
I don't know.
Okay, I'll get behind the bus when
I
I
was
get a
just
chance.
letting you know.
Thank you, darling. I appreciate it. I guess I wasn't paying attention to the phone. I wasn't listening. All right. How many times have you encountered this where somebody says to you like, either you need to listen, you need to sit still, you need to pay attention, you need to be quiet, you need to blah, 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 blah. Those are all different ways of saying you're not paying attention, okay, according to me. So if I'm telling you, you need to speak up more, you're too shy, you need to just stop
In
being so
1,000
scared
feet,
and just
use the left two lanes to turn left onto Monte Vista Avenue.
and just let it go and just say whatever, you know. If I say that to somebody, I'm saying I don't like the way that you habitually pay attention. Okay? If I say to somebody, say I'm a parent, I say to a kid, hey, you need to stop that. It really, really bugs me how you keep tapping your toes and
Use the left two
clicking your
lanes to
nails
turn
and
left
stuff.
onto Monte Vista Avenue.
If I'm telling a kid that, I'm telling them I don't like your SI,
Continue
the
for 1
weakness of
mile.
your SI. In other words, I don't like the way you're paying attention. I don't like how you're not paying enough attention to your knees and your nails and whatever to avoid them from making noise and interfering with the attentional space. If I tell you, you are illogical, you need to stop thinking with your feelings and listen to me. I'm right about cognitive functions. You're wrong about them because you're not using logic, you're using your feelings. And because you don't value the truth, you value the speculative possibilities and stuff more, or something like that. I'm doing the same thing. I'm saying, you're not paying attention enough like me. And so the basic claim here that people pay attention in different ways, and they position the way they pay attention as normatively good in general, is indisputable. It's as true as the fact that people are born smaller than they are when they die, you know? So then the question is, what does psychology have to say about these attentional manners, ways of paying attention? It says instead they're not ways of paying attention, that they're attributes that you can measure. Something like extroversion, agreeableness. It is true that in this display right here, you could measure so why am I so fuck?
Continue on west half a mile.
Everybody's like this. Everybody's the same way. In that regard, we're the same. We all like to pay attention in the ways that we want to pay attention, and we think that people who don't want to pay attention like that are wrong.
Turn right onto North Central Avenue.
You need to just shut the fuck up, woman. You need to shut the fuck up.
There's a thrift store.
We should go there.
Yeah.
They've got a lot of wheelchairs.
Yeah.
In a quarter mile, your destination will be on the right.
What a frustrating experience.
Seriously.
Because, of course, you know, if I were to set this up well, what would have been different? well, I would have planned that I was going to make a video ahead of time. I would have had a little setup for the camera. We would have left at a different time because to avoid traffic or shit like that, right? But if I did all that shit, I wouldn't make this video. Because the same thing that makes me make this video is the same thing that makes me not want to do that planning shit. And you can't have both, right? You can't have somebody who's really spontaneously creative, and also really good at planning it out. It doesn't make any sense.
No.
So each individual,
Your destination is on the right.
if they're going to cope meaningfully with the world, they need to cope in accordance with how they actually want to being able to pay attention, you know, and how they don't want to pay attention, and how other people's kinds of attention bother them and don't. MBTI, cognitive functions, explains people's ways as processes, not as attributes. That's because attentional manners as processes is an attempt to be consistent with what is observationally so. People don't have attributes like agreeableness. They display varying degrees of agreeableness and other sort of things we can say, but it's certainly not an attribute you can measure, except metaphorically. Let me expressly convey why it is that it's so critical that MBTI, quote unquote, go on the offensive in terms of claiming its rightful due, namely the correct approach to psychological examination in general. So let's start with something like scanning the environment. This is a behavior that we know what it means. Somebody sitting there and not saying anything, not listening to any language or reading a book, scanning the environment, looking around, seeing what's going on around them. We like to talk in general, when we talk about human beings, about some proto-human who's a hunter-gatherer who's hiding in the bushes and scanning the environment for prey. If you were to ask somebody like Jordan Peterson, he would say, human beings are visual hunters first. That's why we have such acute eyesight. And our other functions are less significant, and that's why more of our brain devotes more of our attention towards, or more of our brain is devoted towards visual cortex stuff than, say, in a creature with less need for eyesight, like our crayfish. Okay, so that would be a frame of reference called evolutionary psychology, which says we can understand why a human being is as a human being is psychologically by understanding how that given behavior we're looking at explains according to the story of being useful to people in some sort of natural selection-y kind of way. Now, there are a lot of people out there who would say evolutionary psychology is probably the most sensible frame of reference because at least it gives you an explanation as to why people are the way they are, rather than just a taxonomical description of how they are, or a pathological approach, prescriptive approach, where somebody comes to you with a problem. There's all these different frames of reference, right? So evolutionary psychology is one that's an attempt to explain why people are the way they are. Here's the thing. To explain or understand at all why people are the way they are, you have to contextualize in some kind of environment. So Jordan Peterson might contextualize it in the environment of hunter-gatherer, proto-human, becoming what we are now and needing the skills we have now for some other reason. So why would it be so natural for me to ideate in this fashion on a video while driving about abstractions regarding the mapping of human beings? Well, that skill must have had some use in a proto-human, that to keep the tribe together we needed storytellers, and that's why I'm the way I am, because a component of humanity needs to represent this needful component of the genome. It would tend to suggest then that we'd see people's personalities groupings link into populations of families, that everybody in the same family are the same kind of personality in general. Occasionally we see that. By and large, we don't. By and large, we see kids who are very different from their parents. And so one thing when we talk about personality is there's a fundamental psychological question, and psychology in general seems to have lost sight of it. It's a philosophical question, basically, which is, how am I the same single person across time? A contemporary answer to the question is what's known as the single self illusion, that in fact there is no single self, it's just an illusion. Except that would tend to ignore the fact that my body is a single self. There's no illusion there. That if you stab me in the stomach, I will feel pain, well, you will not. There's a single self there. So in other words, it's easy for us to get wrapped up in excessive metaphor and mapping stuff and forget that human beings are singular in self, but process in being, which is to say, we don't ever express being a human except through being a human across time. So once we understand then that personality is an explanation of why you stay you throughout your whole life, even though you grow up and grow old and die. And I stay me my whole life, even though I grow up and grow old and die. Personality is defined as those aspects of a person's self that remain the same throughout their entire life. So, in some sense then, we're asking a question that's about identity and what comprises an identity. We have words to describe them as such. So this is Rachel, not a tree. She is quiet, not talkative. We're always like this, though. So if I'm not talking or initiating a conversation in general, we're sitting quietly in the car. Sometimes Rachel brings some things up. If I initiate something, she'll often riff off of me and stuff like that. This is not in other words, we're minimally responsive creatures. Circumstances may change dramatically. Like, in other words, right now there's these cars over there in front of me. Right now there's totally different cars around me. But it doesn't matter to us. It doesn't impact us at all because we are attending selectively. And so to understand a human being at all is to talk about attention, because that's how humans be. They pay attention. So that's number one sort of area of calculation that we need to respect, is that whatever kind of human behavior we talk about, not every human does that behavior probably. And if we do find something that every human does, it has almost no interesting thing to tell us. So for example, every human is made out of meat. Okay, well, great. I mean, what do we do with that information? I mean, we might conclude something like, therefore, don't put them in a fire or else they'll cook. But we already know that as well. So it's like there's no meaningful information to be gotten from anything that's truly universal about human beings. The problem that psychology currently has, and this is my second main block of argument, is that it attempts to assume a single norm of human expression that people vary from. So there's no perfectly average person who's average in every single way, but we imagine one and we say, well, this person is dumber than average, smarter than average, more creative than average, less creative than average, sleepier than average, more awake than average, more hyper, less hyper, more funny, less funny, all these various attributes we ascribe to people. When we say, like, you're funny, what we mean is you're more funny than the mean that I imagine for the average human being. So, given the fact that we're used to framing things like this, psychology comes up with a bunch of disorders. Many of the disorders are simply expressions of a cognitive function bias not knowing what to do with its own blind spot. Now, I don't want to get jargony here because I'm trying to convey this whole message in ways that are not specific to cognitive function language. But the thing is, if you want to talk about how socially graceful I am, whether I'm awkward or socially graceful, whether these glasses are a good or a bad idea, obviously, Eric, you don't have any concept of how you look to other people, or you wouldn't have put on those glasses before making this video. You've got a really poor sense of how to read the room, or how your behavior is going to impact people's perceptions of you, or you wouldn't have worn those. You might say something like that, right? And so if you were to say that, you're operating under that frame of reference that says, against my understanding of what the average norm is, or mean is, or minimum acceptable is, you are falling short of that standard. And of course, the fact is, if you are very socially graceful and never make any social mistakes and never do anything risky, or always think about all the social implications of everything ahead of time, well, you don't do as many things. So, for example, if I were that worried about making a great impression all the time and making sure that everything plays just the way I want it to, I wouldn't have even bothered to make this video in the car. I would have thought it's not going to come out good enough to publish anyway, so I'm just going to wait till I can do it properly.
Talking with famous people.